Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Corporate Governance Committee meeting. First order of business is, I understand we do not have any public speakers. There being none, I think the first order of business will be the approval of the minutes from our prior meeting, which was, good question, March 26th. Any second? Any questions, comments, changes? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. One of the things that as I mentioned to most of you on the phone, don't worry about it, was the fact that I'd like to have a discussion with the board and to talk about governance changes and specifically some board-related changes to some of our board meetings as well as some of our committee meetings. And as I mentioned to all of you on the phone or in person, let me just review for you very quickly the proposals, and then we can have a discussion about it. Right now, we currently meet every 4 weeks, but for the month of August, what the proposal is that we now move to an every 6-week cycle, which means we'll be reducing the number of board meetings from 11 to 8. There won't be any diminution in information that comes to the board at any one of those meetings. We will, however, also the recommendation is to add what we're calling now the Chairman's Forum, which will consist of both the chair as well as the agency presidents, where they will meet twice with the public to answer any questions that the public may have of them and their operations. I will also add that at each and every one of our board meetings, we will continue to have the public having able to talk to us in accordance with the statute at the beginning of every meeting. So if anyone wants to come and join us and talk to us at any one of our committee meetings or the board meetings, that would continue. Meetings scheduled on an 8 a year would be on January 30th, March 13th, April 24th, June 5th, July 24th, September 18th, November 13th, and then December 18th. Those dates, which are included in the resolution, were taken into account all the holidays, religious holidays, as well as some of our national holidays to make sure that there are no conflicts with all of that. The next item of business is a change in the committee structures. The committee structures, a couple of them. First and foremost, I think the bus committee no longer has Nassau County Bus, and there's no longer any discussion of a regional bus company. So I think it's important that we merge both the bus and subway committee or transit committee back into a bus and subway committee, revert to its original structure. It had gone into this split structure about 2 years ago. As far as the railroads are concerned, also they were about 2 years ago as well, a little bit less than that. They were merged into one. I'd like the opportunity to have a discussion regarding taking the railroad committees and meeting separately, but for twice a year. I still want to keep an enormous amount of effort on all of the things that they can do jointly, but I think that each one of the committees has their own, each one of the railroads has specific things that they need to cover with the committee when it comes to customer service, but on back office related issues that they can consolidate, on procurements, which they need to continue to consolidate, they will be the focus of the joint committee meetings as well as the individual meetings. The third area, as far as subcommittees or committees are concerned, is the area of security. You recall the security committee first started as a safety committee. It morphed after safety became under control. It then morphed into a security committee. It meets quarterly. My proposal is that we now incorporate security at each one of the operating agency meetings every time we meet, 8 times a year, not 4 times a year as it's currently. As you know, at each one of the committee meetings right now, we go over all of the police statistics, whether we deal with the NYPD on the transit side or MTA police on the railroad side. And rarely do we discuss the Bridge and Tunnel Office's responsibility at the Bridge and Tunnel meetings. So I want each one of those committees to focus on security. Simultaneously, we will also be looking at for large projects. Actually, before I get there, I want each one of the committees to also focus on the capital that's being used for security-related reasons, and if necessary, go into executive session if it regards regarding Homeland Security type issues. In addition to that, if there are any large capital projects, move those capital projects to the CPOC committee, for example, the amount of work that's being done on cameras in the subways, be able to look at and let CPOC have oversight over that. Excuse me. And finally, one of the things, as far as there was discussion amongst many of the members about whether or not we continue with the two-day structure, where we meet on Mondays and we have our board committee meetings on Mondays and our board meetings on Wednesday. And there's a lot of reasons, both pro and con, for that. However, what the suggestion is to keep it to just those 2 days. On those quarterly meetings where we have audit, governance, and diversity, to have those meetings on the morning of a board meeting, where generally we don't, unless it's so substantial, we need to have a separate meeting because we're bringing something to the board. We don't necessarily want to bring something to the board just an hour later, which may mean that the board meeting may be pushed back a half an hour and give the opportunity for some of these committee meetings to meet, so we don't have the travel back and forth and all of that. In addition, I'll let Jim and others discuss some of the cleanup changes in the bylaws. I'm very interested in coordinating the ability to do video conferencing in addition to being able to meet in person. There are there are logistical problems to it, and there are some statutory problems related to it. But I'd like our bylaws to reflect what the current state of the law is. I will also tell you later that in a separate meeting I'll talk about a legislative package that we can talk about, seeing if there's any way that we can induce the state legislature to allow us to have more video conferencing on an emergency basis and dealing with some of the rules relating to that. So with that, I'd like to put forward that motion for all of that's included in the staff summary. But before we do that, I'd like to open it up for discussion. As I said at the very beginning, it's all part of having an open and broad dialogue. Governor?
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to remember why the bus and subway committees began meeting separately. In other words, I don't have really any objection to it being restored to the way it was. But what was the premise for the original change?
I will start, and then I wasn't here at the time it was split, so I can't give you first person. But what I've been told is that in 2010, there was 2009 and 2010, there was a movement afoot to create a regional bus organization, such that there appeared to be a move to basically have the MTA coordinate not just the buses in the city, but the buses in the surrounding counties. That hasn't happened. As you know, we used to have Nassau. We were responsible for managing Nassau County Bus. The county executive decided to privatize that, so we're no longer involved in that. So all of the buses that deal in the bus committee relate specifically, exclusively to New York City. And so my desire is that we should have all of the city transit-related issues. They have the same advocates, they have the same issues, they have the same planners, they have the same back office. It just makes more sense to put them together. And was someone here at the time? You might want to enlighten them, Jeff?
Yeah, I was there, and Jeff was there, and we both were on the committee. The regional bus initiative would have included even the outlying mid-Hudson counties, and it made sense at that time that it should be a separate function. Mm-hmm. The other thing was that there were the bus committee with Nassau had a lot of issues that it was dealing with, so it made sense to try to separate that. But to me, it always felt a little odd because we had New York City bus here in the bus group, and occasionally the bus and transit things kind of overlapped.
And actually, there's a significant portion of our bus service, which is part of the transit authority, those that are local and within New York City, as opposed to the express buses that come in from the farther away boroughs into Manhattan. And it would be best if it's all looked at together in total.
Because as all of these things happen, they happen at one time for a particular reason. We were talking regional bus authority. We had Nassau County. There was the old express buses the city had and got merged together, and so they had incremental. Had security get its own committee? Well, we had one or two members on the board who felt very strongly they were experts in law enforcement and security, but they couldn't be at all meetings, so it get transferred. It's not that these weren't done for good and real reasons. It's now, given the makeup of what the MTA is responsible for, with Nassau County not being part of the bus system, and a refocus on the security. And guess I just want to make one other comment. We had a previous conversation about this. I appreciate, I think actually we'll be better served. One concern I had about the railroads being split was the shared services. But if 2 committee meetings a year will be focused entirely on shared services, I think that'll serve us even better, because sometimes it gets lost. I'm not the best attendance at those meetings. I do sit on the committee, but they are very long and you get very split. So if you can focus twice a year just on shared services, I think that will serve us actually better.
Right. I actually think shared services should be talked at all of the meetings, but actually specifically on those 2 meetings in particular, with the direct focus on that. From a security point of view, I realize that there were people on the board who had tremendous security experience, but as it's not a day goes by when the management doesn't focus on security. It is a very, very important issue, but I do think that it should meet with every meeting and should be discussed at every operating agency. And when there are significant issues and events, we will need to go into executive session, even as a board, to discuss certain security issues. Right. Okay, Andrew.
First of all, Joe, I appreciate the call on Friday just to go over this with me, and Joe and I had a talk, and what I'm going to say here is really what I said there. I have no problem with many of these things. I think actually they're very good. Having less meetings, I don't think it's going to make any difference. It's going to free up a lot of the staff time not to prepare for these extra meetings, which I think is important. Cut the paperwork down. I mean, there's a lot of good points there. The one thing, and you've all mentioned it, Jeff mentioned it, Joseph, you mentioned it also, I think that one of the big efficiencies that we've gotten here over the last 3-4 years when Jay was here and now Joe is this shared services thing with the business center. The one thing that scares me is this culture of the MTA is that we have separate fiefdoms here, and it's always been that way, and that is, I think, one of the biggest detriments to running a very modern transportation system, because there's so many things that are naturally shared, and by separating the 2 railroad committees, no matter how, and I spoke to Jim about this yesterday, I know how Jim feels, and Jim lives with it, so, as far as I'm concerned, I would support Jim how he feels, but I think no matter how we try, as you separate these things, you are going to lose some of the efficiencies and some of the policies that we had to keep this thing in the shared service mode and to bring the different synergies together. So I'm personally, I would support it. Jim feels really strong. Joe feels really strongly about it. But I do think that we're going to have a really new round of vigor with the business service center and shared services, because if you want to continue to save, and our budget's predicated on saving money going forward and have more efficiencies, to me, after being here all these years, the only way you're going to get it is by shared services. So I think this is something we can't give second shift to, and I think it's going to be up to the committee chairs and the agency presidents and all of us to be sure that we really keep on this shared service and to get the efficiencies where we can. And that's the one thing I have, Joe. I think it's really has to come from you, really.
Right. No,
as the CEO.
Right. No, I agree. The shared services, we shouldn't lose any. We should do with the vigor that you talked about and continue with that. We absolutely have to. The next stage of shared services, we've gotten down the transactions correctly. We now have to deal with the human relations side of it, the ER side of it, the employee relations side of it, because right now, while will produce the checks and the information, they have to understand who their customer is, and that's mostly either our vendors or our employees. So that's the next stage we're going into. We're going to talk later at one of our other meetings about procurement czar and the hiring of one, so that we can use the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art competitive ways to get the lowest possible cost, and do that through all of the operating agencies. I will tell you, I will never lose sight of expense control and expense reduction here, and I think it's important. I've been saying this publicly. I'll reiterate it here for the committee, especially in light of the fact that there are some newspaper articles today in the newspaper where Governor Cuomo has asked not the authorities, but each one of his direct agencies that they should have no growth in expenses in the next 2 fiscal years. And if we look at it on an apples-to-apples basis, and what I mean by that is that agencies that report directly to the governor don't pay their own debt service, don't pay for their pensions, don't pay for their employees' health care, or especially the retirees' health care. So if you exclude all of that information and put us on parity with the state agencies, we're not providing zero. We're actually providing a negative number. Our growth, we're on track in 2012 to spend less in our discretionary costs than we were in 2011. And that's what we have to continue to do. And as everybody's mentioned, I've got to give Jay an enormous amount of credit for the amount of work that he did while he was here to start and begin this process, because it's putting us in a much better position. Yes, Jim?
You know, even before the two committees were merged for the meetings, separate committees, even before that, the joint procurements had started to roll. Right. And I think the separation of those committee meetings will not hamper that effort. I think we've established some guidelines over the last couple of years that those two railroads are working together on almost every. They look at almost every procurement to make sure that they can, if they can do them either joint-wide or maybe even agency-wide. So it's really, I believe it's a step in the right direction. I think as long as we don't, as Andrew said, don't lose sight of that procurement, because that's the big baby.
No, there's no question. That is the big baby. There's no question. Both procurement and headcount. Make sure, because we're driven by headcount and cost related. Yes,
I want to kind of reiterate Andrew's comment. It was helpful to get your heads-up phone call last week. It did allow us to talk to each other and work out our own thoughts about it, and that's appreciated. With respect to the shared services, I think Andrew knows that I strongly support shared services and the efficiencies that we've been able to get with them. But having lived through combined railroad meetings and individual railroad meetings, I really felt that the combination led to less efficient committee meetings, so that the committee meetings got so long and so difficult to discuss because some of us weren't as familiar with the other as could be, that I really felt we didn't talk about important issues in the joint meetings, and that this is better for right now. The procedure that we use in order to do our purchases always requires that one of the railroads be lead, and frequently it's the two railroads and transit that do these together. Somebody always has to take lead, and as long as that is required, it's more difficult to put it together.
Right.
So I really think that this is the right thing to do at this time, and I feel that the security issue is the right thing to do at this time, not only because of the board members and our own makeup, but also because the first line of security is really the operating agencies and the way the people in our operating agencies are trained to identify and get in touch with our police. I don't want to lose that, because that's our first level of control.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. When you look at the amount of time that's spent at the joint agencies on things that are not procurement related, which we have a whole separate meetings on that. But, you know, I just throw out, just without going bullet points, not going into full sentences, but think about the amount of time that was spent on lightning, how much the amount of time was spent on escalators, how much time was spent on Harold, how much time was spent on trees in Westchester County falling down, and what can we do about it, amount of time that's spent on contract with the state of Connecticut for running Metro North through Connecticut. And those and you're right, when you talk about the contract in Connecticut, the folks at the Long Island Railroad are not going to have any level of interest. So and that's why I think it's important to put everything in its proper place, and those things that require combination be dealt with overall, including at the Transit Authority. One other issue regarding what is going on with the the security committee and putting the security information all back into the committees. I mean, I became aware of those on the Bridge and Tunnels Committee, the lack of an understanding of what was going on, and I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail here, but the hardening of the bridges. That was done completely separate and away from the Bridge and Tunnel Committee. I think it's important, just as they're closest to the management of the Bridge and Tunnels, they understand what is also going on there from a capital point of view. It needs to be linked together. Jeff?
One minor thing. I caught the end of it where you mentioned you were going to look at the technology and the video conferencing and aspects of the law. Just something we should maybe look at is the distribution of the materials for the boards. I think recently, maybe the last 6 months or a year, we've been getting email links, which I think is helpful. We still got lots of books. Still have to carry lots of books to the meeting. I mean, books. I think it's just something we don't have to talk about here. I just hope
As you
get
know,
on your radar.
we're leaving this building at some point. I hope that we will be having board meetings next fall at 2 Broadway. Okay. In combination with the meetings at 2 Broadway, we have been discussing converting all of our books to digital, and the possibility that we'll be providing the board members who don't, if they have one, they can say no, but some form of an iPad or a reader, so that it can be used instead of the books.
I think it's helpful. We do, when I used to sit on the panel for education policy does that as well. Mm-hmm. And the members don't take the iPads home. They get it when they're there. It's preloaded, and that's all that's on there. It is helpful.
Right.
It's helpful for me because at home I can use my own, and when I'm there, I have it there.
And CUNY, where I'm on the board at the City University, they have provided to the chairs, if they didn't have one, an iPad, but I don't use theirs. I have my own iPad, but I also look at it on my computer as well, and access to it, and I can read it out. If I need to print it, so be it. If not, I can scroll through it. The value of having a handheld device away from the office or not tethered to somewhere is that you can read these voluminous documents. By putting these documents as well online, we will look into, as you know, if you take a PDF, there are PDF readers, and so, Governor, that could be helpful to you in the process, so that many of these documents, unfortunately, reading spreadsheets is almost impossible for a computer to do and verbalize, but there are programs out there that will assist you in being able to get this information. Okay.
I also think it's great that we look at the timing of our board meetings. I mean, I've been here 18 years, and I thought that was cast in stone. God forbid.
How do you leave in the morning?
I mean, I leave my house at 5 minutes to 6. So it's, but with those other meetings, which are really, they're really not meetings that.
You don't want to have an audit committee at 8 o'clock?
No,
okay,
not if
fine.
I don't have to. But it's good that we're thinking about moving to, because there's no reason why those other committees can't meet before the board meeting.
Well, it's
Very seldom do they bring anything.
Right. The time is not set in stone. The date is not set in stone, and the number of meetings per year is also by statute not set in stone. So we do have the flexibility to look at it. I will tell you, and as we mentioned, and it's mentioned in the staff briefing, the amount of time and effort to go into these books, the amount of time and effort that would go into even if we didn't have the books, but we put it on digitally, it's all the same, is extraordinary to get all the information. And as I said to you, there won't be any diminution in amount of information we receive on a 6-week basis. It'll still be there, the same number of contracts, and all the other information will go about. But you'll be able to read it while you're on the train or on the subway or somewhere else. Not while you're driving.
All I can say is, for someone who came here from Dutchess County, when I walked through the door at 8:03, he was sitting here.
Right. No question. He's an early bird. No question.
Can
Yes.
I address one more thing?
Yes,
I think that the Chairman's Forum are an important addition. It's always been frustrating to sit through the board meetings and the committee meetings and have the public talk to us and not be able to get an answer back quickly. But that forum doesn't allow an exchange because there's so much work on the agenda and you have to get through the agenda. So I think this is a good thing to do. I think it does give the board more transparency. It gives the agencies more transparency. And I think it's helpful to the public. It's something that they've asked us to do, and it's important. And I think that's an asset, and I'm hoping that it's very successful.
We need to put together the rules on the meetings themselves, where they'll be located, what time of the day they will be, so that there's access for people who work. as well. And it's just one more forum in which the public can interface with the MTA away from actually using our service. You know, we get numerous letters, we get numerous emails. We're now getting numerous tweets, so that it's a new way to go about how to interact with the public and put a face on the MTA, which I think is very, very important to do. We'll have some of these type meetings later on in the year when we have some of our hearings relating to fare and toll increases, so we'll see how that works out. But the rules and regulations of those meetings, location, are to be determined. Yes, sir.
Another thing you might take a look at, and that is committee structure regarding board members, because I think that this goes back 10 or 12 years. Somebody new comes on, they just plug the existing person into the same committees that the other person was on. And at that time, 2 members from the Metro North Committee had to sit on every committee. That's no longer true. So it gives us a little bit more practicality of how we form those committees.
This one will require meetings amongst all of us to determine where the natural fit is.
Right.
And I'll give you an example. We will now have only one member from Long Island for the Long Island Railroad Committee. So we need to figure out who else, in addition to that, will be on the Long Island Railroad Committee to provide the oversight necessary for the LIRR. The reason why I say this, but the Nassau County position is open once Pat went to the Port Authority and stepped down from here. So that, you know, in the intervening period of time, we only have a representative from Suffolk County. So we do need to determine what the right mix is going to be. And I also have to, you know, look at it from a point of view as we discuss it unless the mayor decides something different, we'll have a new mayor next year or at the end of the year. And each one of the board members or representatives of the mayor, I believe, are all in overtime. So the mayor is doing what most mayors do, allow the next mayor to put appointees on immediately, and the MTA is always a big issue for mayors. So we're going to have to think about where the committees will be as well, not just the subway and bus committee, but also finance and areas like that. But yeah, that's the next step, no question about it. Any further questions or comments? Do you have a motion to move forward? Yes, sir.
I can't thank you enough for the conversation that we had on the phone on Friday, especially since this meeting is close, coming up to the next board meeting. And I noted the sensitivity in the meeting schedule when they will be 6 weeks apart to be careful of time and also the different holidays that intervene. So I just would, in illustrating what I want to say, let you know that I asked someone in government to a meeting last week, and it would have been on Monday, and he called me on Sunday and said that he would have admonished me that I asked him to a meeting on the Jewish holiday, other than the fact that he, who is Jewish, forgot that it was a Jewish holiday. And the only other thing about this meeting that I thought was this conversation over the phone that I thought was interesting is that his last name is Quinones, and he hails from Ponce, Puerto Rico. I'm just saying that to say that some of the materials for this meeting actually came on Rosh Hashanah, and I think we have to be careful about.
I'm extraordinarily always sensitive to that. In fact, I never, Chuck Merdler, Trustee Merdler, and Commissioner Merdler and I have gone back and forth on timing on the meetings because of the Jewish holy days, and I'm very sensitive to that. That's why we took out the calendar and wanted to make sure that we weren't interfering with, the Jewish holy days, the Christian holy days, the national holidays, and all of that together, and we're fine in that regard. And do it in enough time so everybody can also plan their own personal vacation time. All right. Motion is there. Second? Second. Motion has been seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Great. Jim, we have some other items to discuss at the meeting regarding governance committee as well as Lamond and the whistleblower protection. Who's next?
Lamond will be presenting the remaining agenda items.
Okay, great.
Each year, this committee is required to review and assess the adequacy of its charter. A copy of the current Corporate Governance Committee charter is contained in your book on page 42. At this time, we are not recommending any changes to this charter. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Okay. Any questions? Comments? None? Go
Whistleblower policy. Among the handouts that I've given you this morning is a copy of the current MTA whistleblower policy, which was adopted in 2010. Each year we review this policy to ensure its adequacy. Again, at this time we're not recommending any changes to that policy.
Are there any questions? No? Come on.
Code of Ethics. I have given you a copy of the MTA's current Code of Ethics, which we just revised last November. Each year we review the Code of Ethics to ensure that it is adequate and covers all areas that are required. We have done that review, and we are not recommending any changes to the Code of Ethics at this time.
A question, how often do we have annual sessions to update board members on ethics? Do we do this on not just at the meetings, but actually bring them and have some training?
We do offer the training on an annual basis. It depends on if they frankly want to come.
Mm-hmm.
It's not mandatory.
Okay.
But it is available, and we can make it available again this year.
Okay, thank you.
Procurement lobbying compliance, working with the General Counsel's office and the agency's procurement staff. We have reviewed the policies of each of the agency regarding compliance with procurement lobbying law, and we have determined that the MTA and its agencies are compliant. And we've also requested information from each of the agencies as to whether or not there were any determinations that there were any impermissible contacts. And as of this date, there have been no impermissible contacts pursuant to the procurement lobbying law.
Any questions? I actually like this law because it tells everybody who calls me I really can't talk to them, which is actually helpful. It is a very helpful law.
Okay. And that's the end of the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Work plan for 2013?
Contained on page 45 of your committee book is the work plan for 2013. It substantially tracks the work plan from 2012. There have been no substantive changes to it.
Okay, and we'll have to look at that in regard to what happens at the board meeting regarding the meetings and how various different reports will tie in to a change approach. All right, thank you, Lamont. Does anybody have any other thing to discuss at the Corporate Governance Committee? With that, I'd like to thank everybody for coming for this off-date committee meeting. I very much appreciate it. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you all. See you later. Thanks.
See you this afternoon.
Yeah, see you later. See you at the working group. Okay. I noticed on the